There's obviously a lot that can go into building a menu, so for clarity before we get started, what I'm going to show you today is basic but flexible. We're going to give you the ability to create menu boxes in your game that have options we can select with the mouse or the keyboard, and therefore gamepads, etc. as well, and show you how to have them perform arbitrary tasks. There's clearly a lot more that might go into your game's menu than that, but this tutorial will hopefully give you the skills needed to build a foundation. To begin with, I'm going to make a script that will contain functions relating to our menu. I'm going to define a function in that script called menu, and this generic script will let us summon a menu anywhere in our game room. The arguments we provide are the x, y, the options data for the menu, which we'll explain more about shortly, and a description which will have a default assignment of -1, which will be used to mean no description, but otherwise will be the text string that shows at the top of the menu to explain what it is. The first thing this function will do is create a new instance of an oMenu object. This is an object we'll define later, which will actually render and control the menu. We use the with statement because we're going to do some setup. It's worth remembering that anything we do here will happen after the instance's create event happens, so we can overwrite any default variables here and also rely on or use any we've established. That doesn't make much difference here, but it's worth keeping in mind. Now, before we go any further, let's explain how our option data will work. The options data we provide to this function will be an array of arrays. Each entry in the base array will represent a menu option. There are two key pieces of information we want to store about each menu option, being the text shown to the player and the function that should be called if the option is selected. In other words, what should happen when you pick that option. We can use -1 as a default here again to insert an empty option that does nothing. So after we make an instance of our menu object, we're going to give it that data and the description we passed as arguments. Then we're going to check how long the base array is, which is to ask how many options are there. Then we're going to set a tiny string to act as a hover marker. This is what will show in front of the string you currently have selected or highlighted. This is optional and you can use whatever symbol you like. You can also do this with a sprite, etc. Of course, this is just a nice simple way to do it. Anyway, we'll next set a margin value. This is a magic number for simplicity, but I would normally like to use a macro for this called UI_box margin or something, I don't know. Either way, it's 8. This is the number of pixels we'll give as a margin for drawing a box around the menu. We need to work out the size of our menu in order to draw a box around it. In order to do that, we'll first set the font to whatever font we're going to use to draw the majority of our menu box. The reason for this is because functions like string_width rely on the currently set font in order to determine how wide a string of text would be if drawn. The font I'm currently using, by the way, is Silver, an amazing pixel font with enormous Unicode support that is great for localizing pixel art games and also just looks really nice. Some links below, probably. We set a width variable to 1 as a minimum just to establish it. Then we're going to calculate how wide the box should be. First of all, if there is a description, meaning it's not -1, then we're going to take that into account. We'll use the max function to set width to whichever is bigger out of itself, currently 1, or the string width of the description. We basically repeat this process for each menu option by going over them in a for loop. This loop sets a value called I to 0 and will loop for as long as I is less than the number of options, and it will increase I by 1 for every loop. While looping, we again set width to whichever is the bigger number, itself currently, or the width of this particular option. We use what's fancily called a chained accessor to get the string of text from options here. We name the base options array, entry I, and then entry 0 of the subarray. Now we know the width, we just need the height. Fonts can still be weird when it comes to interpreting their size and spacings, so for the heights of a given line, I'm just using a fixed magic number, based on my font and personal testing of what kind of works for the height and vertical spacing of a line of text. We'll just multiply this by the number of lines plus whether or not there is a description. By putting an exclamation mark, or not symbol here, the contents of the brackets will return 0 or false if there's no description, and 1 or true if there is a description. So this means we'll add either 0 or 1 to the number of lines depending on if we have a description. That times our line height gives us the height of the box. Then we just add our margin multiplied by 2 to the width and height to give us our final width and height. The reason we multiply by 2 is to account for the margin at the left and the right, and the margin at the top and the bottom. Now we've got a function that can make a menu instance that's holding on to a bunch of numbers and data, but doesn't do anything with it. So let's define that object and its behavior. Make a new object called oMenu and a create event establishing these variables. Hover is which option is currently highlighted. The MX values will be used to track where our mouse was at the start of each frame. Before we get into that though, let's just draw our menu so we can see what we're working with. Add the draw event. We're going to draw a sprite that looks like this. It's just a black box with a white border. Size doesn't really matter because we're using a 9 slice which just cuts the sprite into these 9 slices so that when we resize it, the edges stay in proportion and don't stretch. Just turn on 9 slice and drag the pink lines to mark out where your center, edges and corners lie. We can just use draw sprite stretched in order to draw our box now we've turned 9slice on. We'll draw subimage 0 at the menu's X position minus the margin to take that into account. Same goes for the Y position, and we stretch it out to width full and height full. Then we just need to draw the text, so we're going to do all the usual due diligence when drawing any text by setting the color, font, horizontal alignment, and vertical alignment. Then we use a for loop to go through drawing the menu options one at a time. First, we check if we have a description or not. We again use the not symbol to put a true or false, or rather a 1 or 0 into this variable. 1 if we have 1, 0 if we don't. Then we loop from 0 to the number of options plus 1 if we have a description. If we're on line 0 and we have a description, draw the description text. Otherwise, we get the option string we want to draw. Again, we use the chained accessor to get entry 0 of the appropriate subarray. We want entry L for the line number we're on, minus 1 if we have a description, because if we have a description, L will be 1 higher than usual at this point. Then we check if the current option is one we have selected or hovered. If it is, we change our text color to yellow and we add that hover marker string to the option string. This is also why we reset the color to white with every loop. After that's done, we just draw the text. For the Y position, we just add the line number multiplied by that hard-coded line height value we set when we called the menu function. So now we can test this. I made an oGame object and put this into the global right mouse button press event. Make sure you then put an instance of the object into your game room, the step I always forget. As you can see, this creates a menu at our mouse position and shows 3 options and a menu description. Now we just have to cover the interactivity part, but most of the groundwork is already done. Back to our oMenu object, let's add the step event. We'll start by setting a variable called mouseover to false. We'll use this variable to check if we're using the mouse to select an option or the keyboard. If our mouse XY happens to be on our menu object, this time not accounting for margins, we'll set mouseover to true. Then we'll compare our current mouse position with whatever it was at the end of the last step. We'll update these variables at the end. If the mouse has moved, so these values are different, we'll work out which line is closest to the mouse. Our menus are simple and vertical, so we can just use the Y position of each line. We'll take our mouse Y minus our menu's Y, which will give us a relative Y coordinate, 0 being the very top of the menu, and counting up as we get lower down. We then divide that by the height of a given line. By using div, we do a division in whole numbers only with no remainder. So with our line height of 17, we'll get back 0 until our relative Y becomes 17 or more. Then it will give back 1. Once it reaches 34, it will give back 2, and so on. We then need to adjust for if we have a menu description line, in which case subtract 1. We only want to know which option we have selected, not the description. Then we just check if this value is either below 0 or above the maximum number of options for some reason. If it is, we just cap it at those thresholds. Then we set hover to be this number between 0 and our number of options. That's mouse control. Keyboard control is quite a bit simpler. We subtract a keyboard check pressed of the up key from a keyboard check pressed of the down key and add that to hover. That means if we press down, we'll increase by 1. If we press up, we'll decrease by 1. And if we press both, nothing will happen. Then we just decide what to do when we go below 0 or above the maximum. In this case, I've opted to wrap around, so if we go below 0, we set ourselves to the maximum, and vice versa. You might want to do it differently, but I'll leave it up to you. Now we can select different things on the menu, and we just need to be able to do something when we click one. Well, let's check if we've pressed the left mouse button and we are mousing over this menu at the same time, or we're pressing the Enter key. Getting the brackets right is important here. It's this and this, or this. If that's the case, we check to make sure that the subarray we have selected has a second entry in it. If it doesn't, this option won't do anything at all. If it does though, we'll assign the function it hopefully contains to a variable, and then if that variable is not -1, we simply perform that function by calling the variable with brackets. There's a lot more things you could do here as well, passing arguments that say what menu this function comes from, etc., but I'll leave you to experiment with different structures there. If the variable is -1, as it currently is in every one of our example options, we just close the menu by destroying the instance. If you haven't already, remember to update mxprev and myprev at the end of the step. Now let's create something for our menu to actually do. I've decided to just create an instance of something. I'm using the random cats and dogs from the saving and loading tutorial. You could spawn whatever you want. Just create a global function that does whatever you want. Then just include this function in the array you pass through to the menu command. Make sure not to include the brackets on the end. We're referencing the function here, not calling it. And there you have it, your menu does things. As you can see, making UI and menus and things in GameMaker is quite a lot of work. The good news is, I believe UI dev improvements are on the roadmap for GameMaker, and it also just doesn't hurt to know how to do this stuff manually. Hopefully this gives you a bit of a foundation in how to go about some of these things and keep them as simple and modular as possible. Thank you to my patrons for voting for this topic. They will be the ones who decide if we see more of this kind of thing, investigate different kinds of menu or different aspects of menu design. So if you want to play a part in that, patreon.com/SeanJS. Thank you for watching, and I hope it was helpful. Catch you all next time.